Well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you in this time of year where we have the dark days. Um, Actually, in a few days, we'll be arriving at the winter solstice, and the Earth will start turning towards light again. So we're at this wonderful point of transition into winter from a period when the days are getting shorter to a period when the days are getting longer. Uh, Recently, I was reading a Norman Fisher essay describing a conversation between Buddha and Ananda, in which Ananda asks whether having good friends is half the path. The Buddha said, "No, Ananda, having good friends is the whole of the holy life. Having good spiritual friends, fellow travelers on the path, is very important. It seems that we're all very busy these days. Our opportunities to see each other face to face are perhaps not as often as we would like. And I also know my own tendencies towards detachment and isolation and autonomy. Yet, Sangha, this Sangha, physical and virtual, is the Sangha treasure that sustains us all. And I'm so very grateful for it. I want to talk today about one of Dogen's fascicles titled Dharma Blossoms Turn Dharma Blossoms. This fascicle, or this essay, has been actually very helpful to me over the last few months as I've been working with it. My practice over these last many months is to allow myself to be intimate with my life. And I say to allow myself to be intimate with my life because I've not always done that. Daishi talked last week about practicing with distance. And there are many aspects to practicing with distance. One aspect is recognizing when we are separating or distancing ourselves. So being intimate with my life, I can say that there have been some very difficult things, and there have been some very joyful things. And through it all, my practice and my study of Buddhist teachings have sustained me. The Dharma Blossoms in Dogen's essay refer to the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the earliest Mahayana texts. And Dharma Blossoms Turn Dharma Blossoms, the essay also references the Platform Sutra, which is about the sixth ancestor Huineng. So there's just an amazing amount of Buddhist teaching from early Buddhism that Dogen is commenting on and awakening us to, bringing us to, and giving it his own unique perspective. Of course, one of the essential messages of the Lotus Sutra is that all of the Buddha's teachings are to lead beings to enlightenment. There is no path, there isn't a path for Shravakas and a different path for Pratyeka Buddhas and another path for Bodhisattvas. There is only the one vehicle that leads all beings to enlightenment, all beings. So here's the first paragraph in this essay. The Buddha lands of the 10 directions are just Dharma blossoms. Here, all of the Buddhas of the 10 directions, in the past and present, who abide in unsurpassed complete enlightenment, turn Dharma blossoms and are turned by Dharma blossoms. In this way, there is the original practice of bodhisattvas, not turning back or veering away. There is the most profound, immeasurable wisdom of Buddhas. There is the serene, subtle samadhi, difficult to comprehend and difficult to enter. So let's take the first sentence. The Buddha lands of the 10 directions are just Dharma blossoms. So Dogen often does this. He tells us what he's going to tell us in the first paragraph. He kind of lays out the course of the essay. And in this very first sentence, the Buddha lands of the 10 directions are just Dharma blossoms. Dogen says that everything in this world is the blossoming of the Dharma. Everything in my life, everything in your life is the blossoming of the Dharma. Since your life is not separate from the world, Dogen is telling us that all of it is the manifestation, the expression of the Dharma. So we don't always see this, do we? When we're deep in the muck of our own life, we see difficulties, we see obstacles. We see and we dwell on our own imperfection, or we see and we dwell on the imperfections of others. For example, for me, when I'm anxious or stressed, I have very familiar ways of manifesting my anxiety and my stress. Sometimes I talk too loudly or blurt something out. I mean, something completely not to the point of what's causing my stress, just because I need to say something. And then I'll be angry and ashamed that I've spoken in haste. And I'll be frustrated that I have to be so careful about everything that I say. How can these complex emotions be expressions of the Dharma? But then, moments later, I realize that my words, spoken out of anger or anxiety or stress, are an opportunity for a deeper connection. And I reach towards that deeper connection. Or I realize that my emotions are telling me at a deeper level what I need to do. How can these complex emotions not be expressions of the Dharma? The Buddha lands of the 10 directions are just Dharma blossoms. Dogen goes on. Here, all Buddhas of the 10 directions in the past and present who abide in unsurpassed complete enlightenment turn Dharma blossoms and are turned by Dharma blossoms. He starts off, here all Buddhas of the past and present who abide in enlightenment. So the word here tells us that Dogen is not talking in the abstract. He's talking about this very moment, right here. All of us together, with all beings, abide in unsurpassed enlightenment. And abiding in unsurpassed enlightenment, what do? We turn Dharma blossoms, and we are turned by Dharma blossoms. So I learned that this expression of turning Dharma blossoms and being turned by Dharma blossoms is actually drawn from the Platform Sutra. So as I say, this essay refers to both the Lotus Sutra and the Platform Sutra. And I still have to read the Platform Sutra, but Dogen has guided us through a section of it. So what do we mean by turn here? To turn Dharma blossoms and to be turned by them. So to turn a sutra is a reference to an ancient Buddhist practice in which it was believed that just turning the pages of the sutra, just flipping through the pages of the sutra book generated merit. And you may have also seen these photos of sutras that are printed on a giant cylinder. And it was believed that if you rotate this cylinder, if you revolve this cylinder, you can turn the sutra over and over and over again as a form of practice. So there's a reference here just to practice, and it's in an ancient form. So we can interpret, we turn Dharma blossoms as practice. This is one interpretation that I've come to. And here I mean not just Zen, but also Dharma study, service. or anything that we do from a place of enlightenment rather than a place of delusion. Here, abiding in enlightenment, we turn Dharma blossoms. What does it mean to be turned by Dharma blossoms? So my first interpretation, my first take on this, was that it refers to the way in which we're turned around by the things that appear in our lives. The things that appear in our lives are Dharma blossoms, but we're turned around by them. We are disoriented, confused, hurt, angered, all because of our delusion. Because we don't see that what's happening in our lives is the flowering of the Dharma. Again, I have to ask myself, how can the shit that's happening in my life be the flowering of the Dharma? This is referring again to the Lotus Sutra. The lotus is the flower of enlightenment, which grows in the mud. And as I was asking myself this question about the shit in my life, I was reminded of the parable of Kisagotami. So I'll just digress for a moment. Gautami was a woman in ancient India who was born to a poor family. And she was so thin that they called her Kisa, which means lean. So she was Gautami the lean, or Kisa Gautami. And when she married, she was shunned by her husband's family. Until she had a son. She had a beautiful baby boy, and they finally accepted her into the family because she had brought a son to them. And then one day, this baby boy, this beautiful baby boy, takes ill and dies. And Kisagotami is incredibly distraught. And she wanders the streets of the town that she lives in, carrying the body of her dead infant son, asking people for medicine. And she knocks on door after door asking for medicine, carrying this body of this dead child with her, and people think that she's lost her mind. And finally, someone has compassion and says, "There is someone in the village who can give you medicine. There's a great teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, who is teaching at the edge of town, and you should go see him." And so Kisagotami goes to see the Buddha and tells her story. And the Buddha says, "I have medicine for you. But first you must do one thing. You must go about the village and approach each house and gather mustard seeds for me. And at each house, you must ask them to give you a mustard seed if they have never experienced death in that household." So Kisagotami goes to one door after another. And she asks for a mustard seed, and she asks if they have experienced death in that family. And at one house, they tell her, "Oh, I've lost a son. We've lost a son. We've never gotten over it." In another house, they say, "My mother just died." In a third house, they say, "We lost our grandmother." In the fourth house, they point to a cot in the back and they say, "My husband is dying now." So Kisagotami eventually realizes that there is no life that is not touched by death and suffering. She realizes that she is not unique. And she goes back and sits in front of the Buddha and recounts this story to him and asks to become his disciple. And the Buddha says to her, he sings a little verse actually, Care-stricken with thoughts of children, herds, and possessions, attached to life, death comes and seizes everyone, even as a flood sweeps a slumbering village away. And when the Buddha finishes singing this verse, Kisa Gotami becomes an arhat and becomes famous in her practice and way of life, going about wearing coarse garments and being a model for all the other disciples of the Buddha. So Dogen is not saying in Lotus Blossoms, Turn Lotus Blossoms, that in life there is no suffering. All of us will experience suffering. Within this suffering, we find the seeds of compassion. We find the seeds of awakening. We discover strength and resilience. We find the courage to act. We find the courage to care. Are these not Dharma blossoms? We are turned by Dharma blossoms, and we turn Dharma blossoms. Dogen goes on. In this way, there is the original practice of bodhisattvas, not turning back or veering away. Not turning back or veering away. There is the most profound, immeasurable wisdom of Buddhas. There is the serene, subtle samadhi, difficult to comprehend and difficult to enter. So in this way, turning and being turned, Dogen says that there are three things. There's the original practice of bodhisattvas, saving beings, the Sangha treasure. There's immeasurable wisdom, the Dharma treasure. And there is serene, subtle samadhi, difficult to comprehend and difficult to enter, the Buddha treasure. To understand this, we need to see our lives as the blossoming of the Dharma. Reality, this crazy, messed up world, as the blossoming of the Dharma. How do we do this? We look at the world and we see pain and suffering and selfishness and kindness and joy and loneliness and beauty. Isn't it the case that one of these things or some of these things are the blossoming of the Dharma and the other ones are the working of Mara? Or as my Judeo-Christian heritage would have it, aren't some of these things the work of the devil? So it's in the next section of the essay that Dogen recounts a story from the core story from the Platform Sutra, in which Huineng is visited by a monk named Fada. And Fada's practice is reciting the Lotus Sutra, but he doesn't understand it. And so he asks for Huineng's help. And Huineng recites this verse. When your mind is deluded, you are turned by Dharma blossoms. When your mind is enlightened, you turn the Dharma blossoms. If you cannot clarify the meaning after chanting the sutra at great length, you become its enemy. Thinking beyond thinking is right. Thinking about thinking is wrong. If thinking and beyond thinking do not divide the mind, you can steer the white ox endlessly. So he says, if you cannot clarify the meaning of the sutra after chanting the sutra at great length, you become its enemy. There he's just speaking to Fada, or to those of us who think that following the teachings are like following a recipe in a cookbook, that we don't have to actually be intimate with our lives. We can just find a rule and follow the rule. When he says, if thinking and beyond thinking do not divide the mind, you can steer the white ox cart endlessly. So this is actually a reference, the white ox cart is a reference to the parable of the burning house in the Lotus Sutra, which I won't digress into this time, but when our minds are not divided, when we're not divided between thinking and beyond thinking, when we recognize that both aspects of our mind are part of us, when we're intimate with our lives, we can steer the ox cart of our lives. And then at the beginning is where the phrase comes in that I've been dwelling on this whole time. When your mind is, but he says something else. Dogen says, or Huineng says something else. He says, when your mind is deluded, you are turned by the Dharma blossoms. And when your mind is enlightened, you turn the Dharma blossoms. So again, it seems like, well, one is good and one is bad. When your mind is deluded, you are turned by Dharma blossoms. So I'll jump ahead a little bit in the essay and read a paragraph from a little further on, where Dogen says, what is spoken of as turned by Dharma blossoms is your mind is deluded. Your mind is deluded is no other than turned by Dharma blossoms. Thus, the deluded mind is turned by Dharma blossoms. The meaning is that while the deluded mind is no other than all phenomena, reality is turned by Dharma blossoms. To be turned in this way is neither to be rejoiced in nor sought after, neither to attain nor to arrive. This being so, Dharma blossoms turning is not two and not three. So in this paragraph, Dogen pulled the rug right out from under me. Up until now, as I was reading this, I was thinking being turned by Dharma blossoms is delusion. And that's not what we're after. That means we're doing it wrong. We haven't arrived yet. Delusion bad, enlightenment good. Dogen says no. The deluded mind is no other than all phenomena. In fact, he says it as in a dependent clause. He says, while the deluded mind is no other than all phenomena, reality is turned by Dharma blossoms. The flowering of the Dharma turns reality, all of reality. And the phrase turning here suggests what I think is an underlying perspective that permeates all of Dogen's thought, is that reality is not a fixed thing. It's not an insect that can be pinned in a glass case that can be studied. It's constantly being turned. It's constantly changing. It's constantly revolving and evolving. And Dogen is also saying, don't push away delusion. Don't turn away from your deluded self. If you turn away from your deluded self, you're turning away from yourself. You're separating. There is only one Buddha vehicle, not two, not three. Therefore, don't resent delusion. He flips it. He flips it now, and a little bit later, and takes the other side of it. And he says, when your mind is enlightened, you turn the Dharma blossoms means that you turn the Dharma blossoms. That is to say, when the Dharma blossoms fully turn you, you are empowered to turn the Dharma blossoms. While the original turning never stops, you return to turn the Dharma blossoms. While the donkey, delusion, has not left, the horse, enlightenment, has arrived. This is the single great matter manifesting here and now. When your mind is enlightened, you turn the Dharma blossoms means that you turn the Dharma blossoms. That is to say, when the Dharma blossoms fully turn you, you are empowered to turn the Dharma blossoms. Dogen is saying when we fully inhabit our life, all of our delusion, all of our pain, and all of our joy, when we're intimate with our life, we turn the Dharma. We create Dharma blossoms in the world. He says, while the original turning never stops, you return to turn the Dharma blossoms. So I'm not exactly sure what the reference is, but the original term turning of the Dharma, I think, and I was just brought to think of this as cosmological time, the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang, the moment of the Buddha's turning of the Dharma. This turning never stops. We also turn the Dharma. And when I first heard this phrase, you return to turn the Dharma blossoms, I had in my mind actually the image of a flywheel. Do you know what a flywheel is? It's a wheel that you get it going, and it stores energy. It's a mechanical device that stores energy. And I had this image, just this very vivid image in my mind, that all of us, with every breath, with every action, put our shoulder to the wheel and turn the wheel of the Dharma. Its turning depends on me, and it depends on you. And while the donkey delusion has not left, the horse enlightenment has arrived. We're enlightened in the midst of our delusion. We're deluded in the midst of our enlightenment. This is the single great matter, the great matter of life and death manifesting here and now. So rather than thinking we need to get rid of our delusion to find enlightenment, Dogen tells us that's a misguided notion. Delusion is right here. Enlightenment is right here. And then in the essay, he refers to the parable of the burning house again. He says delusion and enlightenment are both outside the gate, where the children escape to, from the burning house. Delusion and enlightenment are both outside the gate, at the gate, inside the gate, and inside the burning house. So the other shore is already reached. This life, with its difficulties, with its unsatisfactoriness, is also unsurpassed supreme enlightenment. So I was reading an interview yesterday with an actress. Her name's Jessie Buckley, and the interviewer asked her why she seeks difficult roles that explore the most unsettling contradictions of human desire and humanity's ugliest responses to it. And she said, I mean, I'm drawn to it, and sometimes that's scary. I can't help it. I don't know why. But don't you think it's healthier, instead of denying our reality, that we live and die, and there's pain, and there's damage, and there's also a huge amount of love, and there's hope, and there's fear, and there's institutes, and there's chaos, and there's like, what the hell are you doing if you're not like standing right in the middle of it? It takes courage to live an authentic life. It takes courage to be intimate with our delusion and our deluded world. But what the hell are we doing if we don't do that? If we're not standing in the middle of it, being turned by Dharma blossoms and turning Dharma blossoms?